All right. Welcome this evening to Maisel's Documentary Center. My name is Annie. I am one of the programmers here in the virtual cinema. We are so excited to have you. We're also so excited to be here with the filmmakers of The People versus Agent Orange, Alan Adelson and Kate Taverna, along with producer Veronique Bernard. Before we dive into our conversation this evening, I'm just going to take a quick second to give you all a little announcement about what we have upcoming on our virtual calendar. And if you haven't seen it already, please, please, please go check out The People versus Agent Orange. It's streaming in our virtual cinema through March 31st. And while you're there, you can also see our second annual 2021 Youth Media Film Festival, which was curated and run by a cohort of our youth who are participating in the Teen Producers Academy and our community's producer programs, which is streaming for free through April 2nd. And then finally, in our virtual cinema, we have Back Walking Forward, which is here for a special 2-week run for its 10-year anniversary. And you can also follow us on Instagram, on Twitter, or on Facebook at Maisel's Cinema to keep up with announcements about other programming that we have coming up, which there is going to be plenty of, so stay tuned. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us this evening. It's a real pleasure to have you. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about your thoughts about making this film and what it's been like participating with it since it's come out. So I'll just kind of dive in, I guess, a little bit into some of the kind of immediate threads that jumped out in the film to me regarding these two main characters you're following, with Carol von Strum and Trantu, and I hope I'm saying this right, Nyang?
Good,
Nyang?
yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And of course, we have these two people who are affected in both, similar and different ways by this chemical that's used worldwide. And my question in approaching these stories for you both, and for all three of you, is about how you, it's sort of one of the classic questions of documentary, which is how did you find your character? And I guess with the addition here of how did you find these two parallel characters, and did one lead you to the other, or yeah, how did they become parallel characters in your film? Go ahead.
It's kind of mundane. Google Alerts really kind of did it for us. First, Tranto Nya filed a lawsuit in France against what were then 26 American chemical companies, virtually the entire American chemical industry. Kind of a David and Goliath, or Davida and Goliath story. She had been sprayed as a journalist fighting for Vietnamese liberation against the Americans in the so-called American War. And she was sprayed and exposed to Agent Orange at least 2 times, and had a baby while she was in the tropical forest, who died very quickly of a deformed heart. And it wasn't for many decades later that she stopped blaming herself for having a child under such rugged circumstances, and came to understand that her exposure to Agent Orange had caused that. And then Kate, you want to talk about how Carol came down the pipe?
Well, Alan didn't mention that he was already into an Agent Orange development and research before we even found Madame Tron. And that was in 2014 we found Tron, and in 2017 we heard about the Poison Papers and Carol Van Strum's collection of all of these documents that she had put together and collected over 40 years in her barn. And it was so much material that it cracked up the floor of her barn. And that became the moment when she had to get it into a virtual environment. And when we first talked to her, she was amazing. And we wondered how it would balance with the two women and the whole investigation and the whole story. But the two women kind of bring it home for me. It's like mothers dealing with the dangers that their children are exposed to. And who can't identify with that?
We went through a difficult decision-making process and some internal discussion as well. We were pretty far along before we took on this second major character. And there were a lot of cautionary advisors, even executive producers, who said, take care, you're going to go off the rails. You can't do this now, that kind of thing. But the more we looked into Carol and the more we heard from her and experienced her gumption and her courage and what a natural, engaging, dear person she was and how she came off, even on the phone. Our assistant editor, Marley McDonald, set us up for a Zoom conversation with her early in the Zoom era, well before COVID. And she was just so engaging and honest that we couldn't help but go for her.
And it brought it home. It was a newsbreaker for us because we had no idea that Agent Orange had been used in the United States. I don't know if anybody knew that.
I hadn't
Veronique?
heard that. Yeah, that was very surprising.
Veronique, had you ever heard that? We never, no. So it was news.
Yeah, no, that was the main, apart from her being an amazing character and having that wonderful, parallel of having two women who were both, in their 70s. I mean, how often do you have older women who are lead characters, in documentaries? So, and they were on both sides, not actually on both sides of the war. They were both anti-war, but, one was Vietnamese and one was American. It was kind of like a gift, really.
I wonder, you mentioned the poison papers, which are, shown in the film as that massive collection of documents that she got the funding from the Canadian journalist to scan, which kind of, I think, existed online to provide resources and context for folks who are interested in either understanding or being, doing activism or doing work around this global problem. And I wonder if perchance, if the poison papers ever got used in Tran's case and in her lawsuit.
We know that a lot of documents were conveyed to Tran's suit primarily through an American civil rights lawyer, Jonathan Moore, who succeeded in winning the acquittal of the Central Park Five. And many of the same documents had passed among the sort of concerned people in the legal community from discovery documents. It had already been two major lawsuits, one on the part of the Vietnamese, the American Vietnam War veterans, which led to a $180 million settlement, the largest settlement at the time in history. And then the people of Vietnam and the Agent Orange victims brought a suit decades later.
And Carol herself was involved in various toxic lawsuits during that period of time. So she was helping lawyers getting discovery materials and was amassing this huge archive, which is probably replicated in those other, in Jonathan Moore's discovery and in those other two cases, right?
Yeah. It's definitely still going on. The discovery process continues. There are similar gambits that the chemical companies are using today. For instance, Bayer and Monsanto are really up against the wall with the biggest selling herbicide in history called Roundup, with tens of thousands of lawsuits pending against them. The stock market is doing more than the activists could have, I think, to really threaten the process of defending and marketing chemicals that have histories like toxic histories like Roundup.
And the poison papers have also gone on to toxic docs via Columbia University, and they've ordered it in such a way where you can actually go in there and find what you're looking for, where it was much more difficult in the toxic doc, in the poison papers website.
It's kind of boring to refer to documents, but it is so fascinating
when you start reading them.
And they're kind of whispering to one another in these conspiratorial ways. We've got dioxin in our product, and it's the deadliest chemical we've ever studied. They even notify their competitors and call them to Midland, Michigan, where Dow Chemical has its headquarters, and they confer about how to cope with what could be a product killing problem. They say it could be very embarrassing if this gets out. We don't want the government to know. They're going to stop ordering this for the war effort. Or they might even build a factory to make it themselves and not let us make it. And how they will cope is passed back and forth. And you're kind of brought inside the corporate boardrooms to hear the whispering voices. And when you hear those voices and you see imagery of these pathetically deformed children who have resulted from exposure to dioxin, you really get your dander up. And that's what we're finding. Annie, people are responding to the film with rage and incredulity. How could this go on? Why don't we stop it? Why can't it be stopped? What's the matter with our government that it lets this go on for years and years, making more and more people diseased, deforming children, killing pregnancies? And it's not easy to answer those questions.
Yeah, I think part of that kind of like the uneasiness of and the complexity and how to address that question is so broad and so built into, you know, so much of the fabric of the kind of structure of the globalized society that we're experiencing. And I really appreciated how the film focused on these, you know, key figures in resisting it globally, whether it was Tran or Carol or James Clary, the veteran, and from all these different angles and their insight into it. And I wonder and they bring such a great amount of evidence towards the functioning of these companies or the government or whomever the stakeholders or decision makers might be. And this might be a little bit of a kind of treacherous waiting zone for speculation, but in thinking about those stakeholders and folks who are upholding these kinds of the perpetuation, basically, of the use of Agent Orange in even today in America or globally, do you have any sort of like speculation outside, either within kind of just for profit and to keep making money and producing this thing? And I'm also not trying to lead into like conspiracy theory or anything, but I was struggling myself to kind of imagine that only money could motivate people, because I agree that like that rage is so deep and like the effects are so widespread and horrible. But yeah, in making this film, for any of you, did you kind of like confront that question of like what could motivate people to perpetuate the use of this substance?
Veronique?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's unfortunately, this is not the only story of this kind where you have corporate greed and, profit over people.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't the war effort. It was the financial reward that was that, and it's still what's motivating the companies today in Trantonia's case to be so vicious, attack her so viciously. They're just protecting, their stocks, their bottom line, and unfortunately, that is the sort of the more evil side of corporations, and the responsibility is not there. And I think that's what we tried to do with the film, is bring about this need for accountability.
There's that wonderful line from Carol towards the end of the film when she's speaking to that group of people, and she says corporations, they have the rights of human beings, so therefore they should be subject to capital punishment. It's a great idea.
Yeah, that was a beautiful sentiment. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's also really interesting to think about the motivations of the whistleblowers and the resistors and the activists. You mentioned Dr. Clary, who is this tough, prairie wizened figure, often in his camouflage hunting suit. He is a great white hunter, in fact.
But he rescues animals.
And rescues donkeys, as does Carol. It was weird how they both have rescued birds, rescued donkeys, rescued dogs, but Clary almost breaks down on camera. He's within a hair's breadth of crying and says he blew the whistle by notifying Senate Majority Leader Thomas Daschle that they knew, the Air Force knew about the contamination and went about using it anyway. And he says in the film that he did that because he was so upset that the government would not take care of the soldiers who had made enormous sacrifices for the sake of the country, or at least so they thought they were doing. And he couldn't stand it. He could not stand back and let the government lie and refuse to look after the US military victims. So he spoke out. He wrote actually 2 letters and broke history with it.
Yeah. I'm also reflecting a little bit about what you were saying about the documents and the ways that they communicated with each other and the whispering voices. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the ways that you did incorporate archival into the film. Yeah, I think there was, a fair amount of use of archival footage and the documents, and the way that you blended that and like kind of made that a part of this current story and then pushed that into the future. And just maybe a bit about your decision making about what you wanted to use and how you employed the use of archival in your film.
It wasn't just over archival that we used those documents. I just didn't want to look at documents. I thought people would rather look at a little eye candy when they were having to hear about the documents. So, but also that the picture would have something to do or be the exact opposite of what you're hearing in the document. So Tron digging up potatoes is not stock footage. It's not archival. It's actually her picking her potatoes in her garden in France, while we're hearing about how they're going to, stop, they're going to kill the food supply, the food chain for Viet Cong and for anybody else. And then there's the telexes going from the ambassador in Vietnam. There's some archival in that, wonderful color footage of President Diem and the ambassador Nolting, which was astonishing to find. And then you're in rice fields and you're seeing the rice ripen and dragonflies are over it, and that's actual footage. So the archival was mixing with present day footage that we had shot. But I guess I'm not going to give all my secrets away.
Go for it.
So as long as it works, I'm going to try anything I can until somebody says, wait, you're going a little too far with that, But nobody said anything, right, Veronique? So I kept going, and it was not always the same way of showing a document. So I'm hoping that the audience could keep up with that I wasn't being consistent, graphically consistent with showing documents. I was fooling around a little bit.
She kind of trains viewers.
I don't know about that.
At first, there's almost a deliberate derailment. What? That doesn't look like what I was hearing. And then the viewer learns not to insist on being literal. Kate has an amazingly associative mind.
But you don't always know that archival is archival. If I showed you some black and white footage, you would think it was archival, and it might not be. So there's a lot of like manipulation in imagery when you watch anything in film. And we shouldn't have to be tied to the notion of archival unless we're actually making a point that this is archival. That is, in fact, John F. Kennedy, and he's sitting there with his Secretary of Defense and his general. They were labeled that says that's archival, but then you're soon moving into Vietnam and the aftershocks of the decision to use Agent Orange. So I don't know, it was fluid.
Definitely, I found it to be very fluid and kind of like tied together this, or brought together a long history in this moment and made it contemporary. I'm wondering also, throughout the film, there's mention of trans case being sort of the last hope, or like this last chance to get these companies through her lawsuit. And I'm wondering what is unique about her case and why that seemed to be a presiding sentiment amongst the folks who were talking about it.
Good question.
Well, no Vietnamese person has ever won compensation from the chemical companies for manufacturing and selling this highly contaminated herbicide, which was sprayed all over Vietnam. she would be the first. It would establish at least the model, if not a legal precedent that would be binding. Since there have already been these cases, since the Vietnamese people's case was thrown out of the American courts and appealed all the way to the Supreme Court and never reversed in its dismissal. The legal community generally considers it a last chance. It's hard to say with absolute conviction that nothing could ever come down the pike later on. No one could ever claim injury in a way that has not been claimed yet. But it appears to all the observers, and there are many, many, because Agent Orange has been so controversial for so long. There's a tremendous amount of attention that has gathered around Madame Tran's case. For Veronique and Kate and I, it was astonishing when only a little more than a month ago, in the final pleadings of Madame Tran's case, the world press turned out like they came out of the woodwork. And we thought, nobody's really aware of her and what she's been fighting in court for 7 years. And then lo and behold, we weren't the only ones on this at all. There was press from Italy and Japan and the Balkan countries and Spain and throughout France and the US and the Guardian, and it keeps happening more and more. When her case is decided, and the court has announced that will be on May 10th. If she wins, it will be cataclysmic. There will be a eureka moment that sounds around the world, if only because there's so much deeply seated resentment of the chemical companies, and they are far from popular. And people would like to see them wrapped heavily. If Tran's case is proven unsuccessful and she does not prevail, she'll remain this amazing heroine who has struggled and tried and has set forth so much conviction about how wrong the manufacture and use of Agent Orange was, that it should not have happened, and that it still needs to somehow or other be brought to retribution. And I don't think it will go away, whether it's in the courts or the marketplace.
And her lawyers will appeal.
And as Kate says, it's inevitable whichever side wins will appeal it. So the legal rigmarole will go on and on. But holding the chemical companies accountable has become something of a worldwide pastime on the sidelines of Madame Tran's case, and that's not going to go away.
Yeah, I would add on the court case and the last chance issue that there are two other factors that play here. First of all, the fact that she is also French, that she has French nationality, means that she could actually sue these companies in France, and the law changed in France so that suddenly you were able, as a French national, to sue a third party from another country for wrongdoing in a third country. So that really kind of changed the game at that point. That was a window that opened up for her. But the other thing is, you know, she's 79 now, and most of the people who were exposed to Agent Orange themselves, as opposed to the generations of, you know, children who then, you know, inherited and had the mutated gene, and, you know, all the deformed children that Alan was talking about before. And you know, those first generation you know, victims who were exposed to it during that time are going to die off, you know. So it's going to be much harder then to prove for the second generation. So I think there is a sense of, you know, there's a clock ticking, you know, very much so.
It's interesting how the legacy of poison and disease and deformity is being passed down through the generations. We had a biologist who participated in a panel, Michael Skinner, whose studies have shown that exposure to contaminants now produces an increased susceptibility to disease in future generations. So it isn't, as Andre Bouni, kind of the prime mover in Tron's case, says in the film, Agent Orange was an attack on the human genome. But this sort of legacy of damage that can be presented generation after generation. Tron says we're already in the 4th generation since the Vietnam War, and these deformed children who are such sad sights are being born commonly now, still in Vietnam. And the children of American military people are being born here, and their deformities are the same. It's ghostly, and the through line is the herbicide.
This is another reason I'd like to go back to this notion of the archival and the documents. The fact that the present is haunted by the past. So even if you show archival and past footage, it's not history anymore, it's contemporary, it's happening now. So that's another sort of real, maybe it was a subconscious or conscious decision I made to join the two kinds of footage, to keep them closely tied, and so you know that it's still happening.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I wonder if, obviously the release of your film had a very precise timing, I would imagine, in correlation to the case and this moment in the history of this fight against Agent Orange. Since it's come out recently, has there been a reception of energy and dedication towards helping Tron, or is there an idea of this film being incorporated into her case in any way? Or yeah, just wondering about like kind of like the movements that this film has garnered.
Well, we're seeing a tremendous surge in Oregon because of the community rights movement. Those people are still trying to get aerial spraying to stop. And so they're totally behind the film and spreading the tickets to the next person and paying it forward. So, because they all want to be able to stop that. Well, you should tell her about preemption and what are they trying to press up against, this sort of state law that keeps them from changing their own laws by votes and initiatives.
Toxic herbicides are being sprayed from helicopters all over these balded mountainsides in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. Oregon in particular, but also Idaho, Washington State, and Northern California. wherever the Douglas fir timber industry is reaping its harvests, herbicides are being used to kill weeds so they won't compete with the pine trees.
But they shoot it down from such a high level that it's spreading much further. It's not flying down, it's spreading everywhere into other people's land, the water, the surface water. And then Veronique could talk about the what's going on with Tron's case, and all of these people who want this film to be seen in Vietnam and who want to start showing it more in France, right, Veronique? There is a movement of her supporters to try to get the film again.
Yeah, I mean, she's been building that movement, and we sort of document that in a way. The years we've been following her, she's been building that movement in Vietnam, in France, and internationally now. But with the acceleration, shall we say, of the case, and with our film coming out, because it was on Arte in France and Germany back in October, that's really galvanized them, and they've definitely been using it and begging us to make it available in France and Vietnam, so that they can really use it to build that momentum. And they're planning a lot of actions around the date of the judgment. But yes, they I think Tran herself, for a long while, she sort of started not to believe there was a film. You know, it was like, why is it taking so long? Like, it's just like, how can you take so long to make a film? You know. But then when she saw it, you know, she was, yeah, it was a great moment.
And now she's been invited to the Movies That Matter Festival in The Hague.
There's a movement going on around the world to classify ecocide as a crime, either a crime against humanity or a crime unlike any other crime. And they want the International Criminal Court to codify this unique practice of attacking the environment and all the creatures within it.
Destroying it. Destroying.
Contemporary examples of that are the burning of the rainforest in Brazil, for instance. And people want to hold Bolsonaro, the honcho of Brazil, accountable for not only the destruction he's wreaking in the rainforest, but all of the consequences of the loss of the cleansing of the air, of the Earth's environment that the rainforest was accomplishing. So instead we're getting smoke instead of trees that breathe in carbon dioxide and breathe out oxygen. And it will be wonderful if humankind can ally itself and say, yeah, this is totally wrong, and we think it's a crime, and we're going to prosecute it. I'll be a happy man when that.
Yes, but then the United States would have to become a signatory to the International Criminal Court.
Well,
right, in order to be tried or to be prosecuted if they, in fact, also commit ecocide. Right now, we're not signatories.
I hope that the United States won't commit ecocide again. I think after what happened in Vietnam, they might be a lot more cautious, but I've been found to be naive before.
But can corporations also be tried at the International Criminal Court?
That's a very good question that I would like to know the answer to soon. It sounds like you're touching, all three of you are touching on this a bit in terms of what is happening in terms of like the response to the film. But just to put it another way and kind of to wrap up in the interest of time here, in investigating this film and and creating it, and now in releasing it, what has there been something particularly hopeful or sort of a path of hope that is emerging from all of this for you?
I'm really excited that in Oregon, where there are such huge problems with the aerial spraying of herbicides and the contamination of the water, that the community rights movement has gotten really excited about this film. And it's playing on a lot of theaters' digital platforms out there, and they are leafleting and posting posters on lampposts and getting people to see the film and then teaching from it and advocating advocacy. And as Kate mentioned earlier, there is this dynamic of preemption, which has made it almost impossible for communities to defend themselves from being poisoned because the states control environmental issues such as fracking, such as the spreading of toxic waste on hillsides. And lobbyists can influence the state legislatures far more readily than they can control community councils. And so when communities pass bans against the aerial spraying, the powers that be get together and appeal and defeat those bans on the state level, saying that decision belongs up to the state and the people are being disempowered. So it's a thrill to see the film serving that movement, the community environmental rights movement.
I would just add that I would leave the last words to Trantonia herself. She says at the end of the film that, you know, no matter what happens with the court case, she feels that she's already won because she's made the catastrophe of Agent Orange known to a much larger part of the world. And it's true, when you see the movement that this little old woman started all on her own to begin with, that's, you know, global movement now. And as Alan was saying, when you saw the number of journalists who were covering just the final arguments in the case, let alone the decision, it's true. I feel that she has already achieved a lot. And that to me is very hopeful, that more people will know about it and more people maybe will go out and as Carol said, the younger generation of activists coming right behind us, you know, that they'll take over and do even more damage than we did.
She calls them troublemakers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you all, Kate, Alan, Veronique, for joining us this evening. And I will be looking and listening for those results coming up in mid-May. And also thank you all for making this film and bringing it to, allowing us to bring it to Maisel's audience. We will be sharing this conversation on YouTube, so everyone can check it out there, along with other panel discussions that we've hosted over Zoom for the past year. And please go check out Agent Orange, The People versus Agent Orange, if you haven't seen it already in virtual cinemas. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Very much so.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Annie.
Have a great rest of the evening. Take care.
You too.